set? All right. All right, so now I'd like to welcome our Biscayne Bay Marine Health Coalition Steering Committee member, Karen Beber-Futernick, who will be moderating this panel. Again, this panel is Developers' Responsibility to Environmental Stewardship and Biscayne Bay from Design to Delivery.
All right, I have been looking forward to this conversation for 2 years. So I'm very excited to introduce this incredible panel and have this very important discussion. When we think about development and construction and the built environment, we really just see what's above ground. We see the buildings, the roads, and the streets. But resilience is shaped by design decisions that are made long before any shovel hits the ground. So I'm very excited now to go behind the scenes and to talk about the developer's obligation to stewardship and to know how we can do better for the Biscayne Bay watershed and for South Florida and for Biscayne Bay. Okay. First, we have David Martin. David is the CEO of Miami-based development firm Terra. He has cultivated a portfolio spanning more than 8 million square feet of residential and commercial real estate. He oversees all facets of Terra's operations, including development, design, construction, financing, marketing, sales, and leasing. He is arguably one of the most influential voices shaping South Florida's built environment and brings a powerful perspective on the future of resilient, community-centered development. As CEO of Terra, he has helped redefine thoughtful urbanism through design excellence, sustainability, and a deep commitment to Biscayne Bay and the future of our region. Terra consistently integrates green space, renewable energy, forward-thinking construction methods, and transit connectivity into its developments. And David was a member of the Biscayne Bay Task Force, which you heard about earlier. Thank you. Thank you. All right, there's Juan. Sorry, I'm going to skip for a second. Sorry about that. And I have Juan Mullerat. Juan is the founding principal of Plusurbia Design and an internationally recognized urban designer and city planner. With more than 25 years of global experience, Juan works at the intersection of planning, resilience, infrastructure, and community-centered urbanism, helping cities become more livable, equitable, and future-ready. Juan brings an essential perspective on how the way we plan and build our communities directly impacts the future health of Biscayne Bay. And who's next? I have Ken Naylor. Ken is the president of development for Atlantic Pacific Companies, a national firm headquartered in Miami that focuses on providing housing for every income level. He has overseen the development of over 20,000 units of mixed income housing. This includes the first LEED certified affordable housing development in Florida and dozens of subsequent developments. And Walter Meyer. Walter is a licensed landscape architect, adjunct professor at Stanford University in New York, and principal of Local Office Landscape Urban Design, called Local, in Brooklyn, New York. He has been engaged as a lecturer at Harvard University, Yale, Columbia, Penn, MIT, Stanford, UMass, Florida, right? Utah, Parsons New School, and Pratt. The New York Times documented how green infrastructure in Local's Miracle Mile project, which we're going to hear about today, adopted the flood-prone Central Business District in Coral Gables into a beautiful climate-proof community. He is a nationally recognized voice in resilience and regenerative design. He brings a powerful perspective on how ecology, infrastructure, and community can work together to shape a more resilient future for Biscayne Bay. So I'd like to start with, this is episode 3 of a film called The Future We Build. So here we go.
It hasn't rained, so all the water that you see behind me is water coming backwards up the storm drain system or over the top of seawalls and flooding this parking lot. The risk is that every street and parking lot in Miami starts to look like this one behind me. Since 1996, we have already documented 6 inches of sea level rise in Miami. That 6 inches has already resulted in over 400% more flooding events. The prediction now is that the next 6 inches will happen in about half the amount of time.
But king tides inundating streets across Broward and Miami-Dade counties.
And not a drop of water came from the sky.
We can't ignore that flooding is becoming more frequent during king tides and getting higher. And we can't ignore that the insurance companies are getting so expensive that it's impossible to have a mortgage for the working class.
So Miami's really at the forefront of having the most resources at risk worldwide for sea level rise. And I think that that's a unique position that Miami's in. We could develop the solutions here and spread them around the world. Part of what makes Miami so vulnerable is not just its low elevation, but also its geology. Miami is built on this porous limestone, and the water table is really shallow. So just a foot or two below ground, you start to find water in all of those rocks.
We are sort of a sponge in a dish. And so walls do not keep water out of our neighborhoods because it percolates through the ground.
So the solution is ecosystemic. We have to work with the ancient geology of the place. We've created a hazard out of it because we put in a compacted urban fill on top of that porous geology. If we can reconnect our urban forest to that groundwater, to that porous geology, we can then resurrect these ancient systems that create a check and balance between groundwater and heat. As the groundwater gets higher and the heat gets hotter, the trees turns the two negatives into a positive.
And the natural geology always asserts itself, whether we want it to or not. So it's better if we understand it and we work with it than if we try to work against it.
Sea level rise is something we need to work toward, but that's the long-term problem. The problem today is those rain bombs. How that impacts the small business, how that impacts society, how that impacts people's living conditions.
We have really designed Miami to be a funnel to get the water off the streets into the storm drain system and into the canals as quickly as possible. And we kind of need to flip it to the reverse, where we have places where we can put water when we have too much water.
Miami needs a climate overlay in their zoning, but they need to address it in a quantitative way. Like for every 5 square feet of interior building, we need to hold X amount of gallons of water. Our buildings have to function like living buildings and hold and reuse water. Things like blue roofs, cisterns, even boundary walls that are hollow. We have to find every little nook and cranny in the city to hold water.
Our roads have to trap and store water underneath them. If this parking lot was changed to be a filtration system rather than cemented asphalt, we could be storing water there and it could be trickling slowly into the aquifer when there's space in the aquifer for it to sink in.
We need to find environmental flood mitigation solutions that also provide a benefit to society, like parks, like green space, like walkable neighborhoods.
Giralda Plaza is the nation's first living street. That is a system of porous paving and subsurface soils. It's a plaza, a lot of concrete, a lot of stone, but underground it has all the systems of the urban forest. This space is resilient because of how much water it's able to absorb, much like the wild places of the Everglades.
We have multiple types of infrastructure that are already failing as a result of sea level rise. So septic tank is one of the ones we have an answer for. 50,000 plus properties in Miami-Dade County in 2025 don't have proper waste infrastructure in their homes because the groundwater level is so high and so close to their septic tank, it's not being cleaned. And that's both a public health risk and an environmental risk. It's estimated that to get all 120,000 urban septic tanks removed, it would cost about $4 billion.
If we don't start to manage the economics of climate change, it will start to manage us. And we need to encourage developers to engage in long-term economics so that the daylight for the return on investment shifts from a capital investment to one of a life investment, that it's lower cost to own over the life of a project.
In climate resilience, it's very difficult to identify the ROI. On the climate side, sometimes you're not sure whether or having a certain engineering solution on controlling water is actually going to work. The unique side of climate resilience, I think, is that it's so multidisciplinary. We need planners working for our cities with that mindset.
I think there's a lot more talking about the plans and the problem than there has been actual money towards investing in fixing the problems. We haven't seen comprehensive plans. Without a plan for what we want to do, it's hard to attract money to pay for that plan.
It's been made very clear by our federal administration that it's up to the state.
I'd rather see the states take care of their own problem.
And the state is going to tell us it's up to the locality to determine what the best path to resilience is, because that resilience is very localized. You need to get all of those people to come together and say, we need to produce a bond issue to pay for it, which is then going to increase our taxes. But we're going to get that done to protect our houses. So there's a need for shared thinking and action beyond what we are accustomed to.
It will require an educated community that cares about the issue.
Doing nothing will be the most expensive thing we've ever done, and we'll learn that in 50 years. The Miami of the future and the way things are now is a Miami that won't exist, because at some point, it'll only just be a few people here that can live in this place.
We have to think differently about what infrastructure looks like, what an urban landscape looks like, and how we tie nature and green spaces in.
So we have to create new economic models that are dynamic, much like nature, and able to work with the cycles that nature has.
We have examples that this is possible and that this works. We need to be deploying this at scale and really thinking differently about how we're building the future of Miami.
My first question, David, is for you. Why did you have this film made?
I think, I started Terra in 2001, and for the last 25 years, I've been engaging with, a lot of, communities and in society. And, I think this is one of several episodes, but there's this common theme that affordability, transit, walkable neighborhoods, flood mitigation, adaptation, all these concepts just continue to happen, right? To more deeper discussions about it. But legislatively, things aren't happening, right? And so for me, this film is not only a way of trying to get the electeds kind of to start prioritizing these investments or allocating resources in these initiatives and think differently about how to solve them, but also to kind of get the community that may not be a scientist or an engineer to really start understanding the complexity and start advocating for change.
Thank you. Some time ago, I read that you said your soul feels a sense of urgency. And in the Herald article, which was very timely, I must say, you again expressed an urgency to act now. So how can you and we translate the sense of urgency to everybody? How do we translate this? So not only to developers, but to our entire community, so that we all understand that the time we must act is now, in what we build and how we build, in the bonds that we approve. So how do we get this done?
I think it starts with trust. There's been so many battles and so many different issues in our community, and we have this polarization that exists. And what ends up happening is a lot of times we agree on 80% of the issues, but we focus on the 20% of the things we don't agree on, and then nothing happens and nothing changes. And so for me, it's kind of respect and honoring each other so that business, community, government can start getting aligned Because what ends up happening, I mean, I had a meeting this morning with an activist in Coconut Grove, and how we approach working together and collaborating, I think really can lead to really positive change and constructive change, rather than this concept of frustration and anger and lack of engagement and lack of trust.
Before we get to look at your different projects, the 3 projects, when I was preparing for this panel, I had conversations with everybody. And Juan, when I was speaking with you, you had said that one of the things that you really respect about David, and that he may be one of the only developers in the country who takes a multidisciplinary approach to the design process, bringing new voices, new perspectives, and new intelligences. So David, why do you believe that this very colorful, inclusive design process results in the best outcomes, and where do you look for and where do you find the new voices?
We need a business case to most things, right? If not, I don't think these concepts and ideas are sustainable. So, I love sitting down with Juan or Walter or even Ken, because they have these amazing ideas that I'm not an expert on, but I love kind of that collaboration and thought process to tackling a problem, because I think that if something is good for a neighborhood and solving a problem, it's good for the asset and the long-term asset value. And I think we need to, it's that whole question Walter mentions in the film about that short-term versus long-term thinking. And so, for me, the design process, should take a little longer, right? It should be, engage that community, engage these experts in trying to figure out, what are the challenges in these neighborhoods? And a lot of times the people in the neighborhoods know more about the problems than any one of us. And so having that collaborative kind of process that, and sometimes, you have to make a decision, you have to move forward, you have to, think about, what are the risks of not doing anything, or risks to a particular asset that, if you don't improve or deal with some of the problems, and whether it's education, right, where we need, better schools and better teachers and teacher housing and those types of initiative, or we need affordability and we need supply, but the supply can't just only take the form of a tower. It should be a row house, a townhouse, a garden apartment, a courtyard building. I mean, these are all things that we have, tools we have in our toolbox. And if the business community and the community in general, society can get aligned, sometimes these election cycles change, but we could start have common vision that we could see through, because most of these things take longer than 4 years or 8 years to solve. And so I think just trying to get that alignment and getting great experts involved in the process, I think provides credibility, and making informed decisions based on data, I think is what our goal is.
All right, let's take a look at some of the projects. Here you go.
I'll go quick. This was a project that we did in Miami Beach. It was basically for like 15 years. It was an asphalt parking lot that was just sitting there doing nothing. And so there was an idea, there was an approval where you basically could build on all 7 acres, or you could create a green space park and get some height as part of the process. And that's what we did. We calibrated the zoning code, probably had 30 or 40 community meetings with different community associations in Miami Beach. But one of the big moves was not only do a park, but kind of what Walter was talking about, what's happening under the park. So one of the big challenges and things I learned on the Biscayne Bay Task Force is this nutrient overload we have in our bay, and how do we solve it, right? So we put together around 13 water quality wells. So not only is this park kind of storing water in a way for the 64-acre basin of South Beach, but it's also It's also helping when it is time to pump, which we want to avoid, but if it is time to pump water in the bay, that these water quality wells clean them. And then we did a lot of different cool moves with cisterns and other things that kind of are just cool ideas, just to start piloting some of these concepts so that we could start making this kind of the standard for how we create our parks, rather than not thinking about these amazing opportunities for public infrastructure to be designed resiliently, rather than just doing a park without these concepts. This here was a project we worked with Walter. Walter, you could join in if you'd like, just, talking about his whole idea, which he's been, hammering in my head, which is how trees can store water, right, and become part of the stormwater management system of the infrastructure. And if you want to mention a little bit about it real quick.
Yeah, this was an ancient pine rockland, when you look back 100 years ago, where the Metro Rail was built. And a lot of this was regenerating both some of the pine rockland, which you see in another slide, and from the biodiversity perspective, but also bringing some of the coastal natives along this ridge to support the pollinators that follow the coast. We even put in this project a cliff forest, a forested facade. Miami's first, you see this in Milan, the forested trees. This was focused on natives in the forested facade. But the goal being that, how do we find ways in the most urban environments and most civic environments to weave nature into it and have a position, even in its wild form in the frame of the city. So this is the active city making. And
this is a TOD. It's a county ground lease. We built 400 apartments that have some affordable and workforce in them. And we created a lot of jobs and kind of oriented all the retail. There's a Sprouts grocery market, et cetera, that we oriented all the retail to the underline, which Juan will talk more about, and the transit station, which I think was pretty cool. This is a new concept that, Walter's pushing me as well to think about, which is two things. One, how do we, manage stormwater? How do we clean the stormwater so we could start getting some fresh water in the bay? In order to kind of improve the quality of the bay and seagrass. And then the other idea is how do we design our marinas in a way that are more blue flag marinas and really clean certified, and like they do in Singapore, for instance. And Walter, I don't know if you want to share something on this.
Yeah, so some of the cleanest marinas in the world are in Monaco and Singapore, and they have the equivalent of LEED for marinas is things like Blue Flag, but they require recertification. So it's not just about the developer building a project, but the vendors and concessions who take over that the life of the system recertifies. And my position is that Miami should require, and start with pilots, in marinas, but require that these docks start to contribute to the polishing of bay water, and that any inland facilities start to contribute to the fresh and saltwater interface. In the case with your typical marina in Miami, a large marina is going to have about 100 to 200,000 square feet of dock. That's about between 0.1 and 0.2% of the entire bay's volume if it had sponge docks. That's about 3 or 4 feet deep below the dock of sponges and other corals that could polish about 5,000 to 10,000 gallons per square foot per day. What that would result in is a plume of clean water coming off these docks, right? So you'd have a net positive impact for about a $2 to $3 million investment per marina. And so that's not a lot of money relative to the types of investments, but that's just the salt water side, right? We're talking 250 million gallons a day of being polished per marina. But now we shift to the freshwater conversation. Can the buildings be living systems? And we're managing water from the sky to the ground to the bay. And the reason we don't have oysters anymore in the bay is we've dredged out all of our channels, so we lost the steady state flow. So the meme for the day is restore the steady state. Bring back the fresh water, let it flow slowly into the bay, not too much fresh water after it rains and not enough in between. Then we get those oysters that do all the incredible work that we know oysters do. 2,000 gallons per day of polishing. You see a photo on the bottom right of 4 hours of polishing in a 1 cubic foot of oysters. So we have these tools, but we have to support the ecosystem to give us those ecosystem services. And we have to work upstream of the financial decisions. We have to put science at the beginning of the financial decisions, and that's done in legislation, but also working in the marketplace through public-private partnerships so that science, art, design are all up front and not on the back receiving end when all the financial decisions have been made.
Good job. And this is another concept here, so I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Juan. Yeah. So, Juan, you've been involved in the design and planning of the Shoreline project, and I learned from you that this is possibly the largest infrastructure project in the country that reclaims impervious asphalt and turns more than 11 acres into permeable, usable public space. So can you please take us through the design thinking process for the Shoreline?
Sure. Thank you. So I don't have all the numbers like Walter. I don't know if you wrote them all down. I wish I had a notepad. To us, it was a very simple and very clear opportunity. We had this opportunity to work on it with David and Gene Stearns, who actually brought us in with a crazy notion, which was how do we change the way that the Rickenbacker Causeway works. And if you've ever worked with infrastructure of this magnitude, you'll know how difficult it is to work with different agencies. But for some reason, and this is one of those things in these projects, you never know if the stars will align. In this one, they did. And between conversations with different elected officials and with great vision, we were able to propose a radical idea, which was to take the 9 lanes that exist on the Rickenbacker. If you all can picture the Rickenbacker between the beach and the actual causeway, you've got this thin piece of land, which they call a public beach. If you've ever been there, especially after a storm, sometimes you have 3 or 5 foot of beach. And if you've been in Miami long enough, you'll know that that's really the only beach in the city of Miami. So when you have guests that come to Miami and they're looking for a place to take a picture, don't take them there. There's other nicer places. So the goal is very simple. Make that a destination, a real beach, a place where we can remove some of the infrastructure impact that the current causeway has, push it up onto a viaduct, and in that way gain a whole bunch of open land underneath that could be devoted not just for people, but also for the ecosystem to sort of come back and reclaim the area that really should be for pedestrians and for bikes instead of for cars. Currently, we have 48,000 trips going from one end to the other of Virginia Key, 28,000 of which are just going directly from inland to Key Biscayne. And if we were able to only remove those 28,000, that means that we could increase the amount of the amount of space and reduce the volume of cars that are going actually on the ground, and therefore slow them down to a point that it could be, a commissioner called it a residential street, but really a calm access road or street that would be friendlier to bikes and pedestrians. So as you can see, I'm actually giving you some numbers. But the idea, again, is very simple. The amount of space that those 9 lanes take on the ground level could be really a wonderful, is that my last slide? I had some really sexy renderings. I don't know where they went. But this is a project that is ongoing. It's a public project. We're working together with the Underline. The reason why it's called the Shoreline, well, I guess I don't have to tell you, you're all smart people. It's what we call the little sister of the Underline. It would be an extension of the Underline. The Underline right now, the Friends of the Underline are working with us together with engineers, and we're working with the village of Key Biscayne, as well as the city of Miami and the county to come up with to figure out whether or not the project is feasible. The good news is that we are halfway through the project and it's still feasible. And eventually what we're going to see is that we're going to be able to provide not only a larger beach for enjoyment, but also additional dunes. The ecosystem can then be restored. A 20 to 35 width multimodal trail, which will be similar to the underline. And then additional parking and additional bike lanes that will go along the Causeway Street underneath this viaduct. The project will, in addition, add amenities, which currently that area lacks, and it will reduce the distance for crossing for pedestrians and students. If any of you have been to Mast, at lunchtime, the students cross those 9 lanes to get a taco. That only comes to show how terrible school food can be. Because they take their lives into their own hands in order to cross that thing. So we would reduce that to just 4 lanes, and it would, in essence, be a benefit to all, and provide a beach in a place that where there used to be a beach, and an improvement to the ecosystem throughout. And that's the project.
Thank you. Let's see the next. And Ken. So Ken, you build in the affordable housing space, which typically does not touch the bay, but of course it does through its impact on stormwater. So talk to us, please, about how projects can be affordable and beautiful and thoughtful about the environment, and really how you are future-proofing your projects. I'd also really like to hear your thoughts on how you can encourage and include innovation in the very tight space of mixed-income housing.
For sure, thank you. This will be the least sexy project you see today, but we'll give you some good stuff nonetheless. So Culmer Place was a super block. Do we have the? I'm disoriented on the slides. Okay. Was a super block that comprises 4 blocks of downtown Miami, but really Overtown and really west of 95 Overtown. So not just wrong side of the tracks, also wrong side of the highway, wrong side of the decisions that Eisenhower made to plow a highway through the middle of this historic black neighborhood, right? So lots of baggage on this site. There were 226 units spread over 20 acres. So it also is sort of a tragic underuse of our urban core from a density standpoint. Some of the things we did on this site with Walter's help were creating a landscape infrastructure, he called it, which enabled us to divert water to a drainage system into rain gardens and other plantings throughout the site so that nature did what sort of nature naturally does in Miami if you design for it. As a funny aside, we did have one federal government employee come down from Washington and look at the design of the rain gardens when it was just conceptual and go, I don't know, is this going to be safe? Are the kids going to fall in and die? So there is resistance to this stuff. You know, David talked about some drainage systems you don't know whether they're going to work until you actually implement them. People don't understand that humans can live without every inch being paved. This image shows how the superblock was broken with this north-south spine running through the site, and that was very important from a planning standpoint, just to be able to reintroduce normal pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic through the site. The pool that you see depicted there is really a piece of pride for the residents. They never had, historically, the people who lived there never had pools, never had access to pools. Many of them never learned to swim as a result. So the fact that we were able to deliver them a pool was a big deal. As you can see here, there's a rainwater management system that Walter designed that creates a lot of porous paving, structural soil work, and the rain gardens that I mentioned previously to divert the water to the right places. I think this is probably the most important slide. The hashed line around the perimeter shows that original super block. And it shows that there was actually a big topographical difference between the different sides of the site. There was sort of an ancient river on one side and then lowlands on the other side, and this coastal ridge running down the spine. Because of those different soils, we looked at using different trees across the site as well. And you can see those trees there. So this is the finished product. As I said, the paths drain into the plantings, which you'd be surprised that is not necessarily what normally happens on a site when you go to a standard landscape architect in Miami. One of our goals is always to also make it be sort of indistinguishable from a market rate apartment complex. I think we met the mark here. And the other cool thing that Walter did is in reestablishing the street grid, he also curved the road to make it a little bit more interesting and human scale and slow people down. This is the pool that everyone is so proud of. We made it Olympic sized to give people the ability to really learn to swim, and we worked with an artist to create that fence around it that references some of the landscaping that we put in, and the color references the color of the pool. There's some of the porous paving. So just to wrap up quickly, that important slide that I showed you, this site fits into a larger hydrology, right? And that was the insight that none of the other designers I'd worked with before Walter really saw immediately. And that understanding what you're draining into and how to keep things on site is critical. You're supposed to keep things on site as a developer, but how you do it creates a profound impact on the environment. Thanks.
Okay, Walter. Your approach to landscape design work, you really consider it part of the project's infrastructure. It's not just the aesthetics. We talked about how you hold, how you polish, how you clean the water before it gets released. So love to hear more about this, see a couple of your projects, and then you'll see at the end we've talked about some really interesting, innovative funding mechanisms. So how do we get this done? David touched on that. How do we get this done? So I'd love for you to talk about that as well, please.
Yeah, I just want to thank Ken for that, because I think it's important that this work not just exists in luxury towers, some of the beautiful things that David builds, and he also builds workforce housing, but it can also be 100% affordable projects, can make room for this type of thinking. Finances are not the reason to avoid this, and operation and maintenance is not the reason to avoid this. It can be done, and I just want to commend you in 100% affordable housing for making what looked like luxury condos. Like architecturally, I just want to, that dignified public realm is really critical. So I want to, there's the history of Miami, which is, there's the modern history, right? So there's the settlers from Ohio and Julia Tuttle and the industrialists who built the infrastructure. Then we have the New Yorkers who came down and did all the Art Deco architecture. And then it still was, a provincial resort city. And then came the Cuban immigration and the Latin American immigration that made this the global city that it is today. And for years, a lot of mayors have said this is a global city. Quantitatively, it was not until now. And so now is certainly a north-south axis, that New York is an east-west axis in the United States. New York is Asia meets Europe, Miami is Canada meets South America, but now it's become its own financial center. But before all of that, water was always a part of the sequence here. And the reason Miami exists is because of the water. There's a lot of treatment of water as a hazard, but it truly is an asset. The Miccosukee and the Seminole, who inhabited here, they were the last unconquered tribe in the United States because of water, because they were able to defeat Andrew Jackson's troops because of the water. They had a navy, and they lived in tree islands, and those tree islands were comfortable because they had evapotranspiration. And I want to point out that whenever there's ancient knowledge about a place that intersects with high technology, I call it the intersecting AIs, that is ancestral intelligence meets artificial intelligence or new systems, we need to pay attention at that intersection. And one of my favorite researchers out of FIU is Dr. Leonard Cinto, PhD. He's a hydrogeologist. And before I designed Miracle Mile about a decade ago, because Miracle Mile is now on its 8th year, and we're starting to work with Meyer Lago to quantify the cost per square foot of maintaining Miracle Mile over the past near decade. And that's important numbers to have that O&M. But what's important on Dr. Cinto's work at FIU is that about a year before I started designing Miracle Mile, he did a study of the tree islands of the Everglades. He built an artificial tree island, planted it out with young saplings, and measured its efficacy, its impact on groundwater. And what he found is that the groundwater would lower about an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch per day, and the groundwater would drop the more the sun came out. So the hotter it got, the more the groundwater would drop because the trees are evapotranspirating that water up into the air and atmospherically cooling the zone around it. And so the Miccosukee planted these trees out on these midden mounds, their own oyster shell waste mounds. And the oyster shells were what we call today structural soil. They're about 40% void, which allows the tree roots to grow into that groundwater. And so I think it's important that when we design cities, that we think about that science and that ancient knowledge, and how do you design an entire corridor, an entire district in a city that has that same ancient system, but it looks like a civic landscape of the future. And so Miracle Mile today, it opened about a month before Hurricane Irma hit, and it was tested by Hurricane Irma, one of the heaviest rain events in Miami's history. And it used to be a soggy district. A lot of the high-end shops would flood every summer rain. But in order to build Dr. Cinto's tree island in downtown Coral Gables, we had to excavate that urban crust, that 3 feet of fill that's all over Miami below our buildings, so that we can reconnect the trees to the groundwater. We're at elevation 8, which is high ground for Miami, but the groundwater during high groundwater season starts to get up into the root zone of the trees. So that was our opportunity to have a check and balance system. When the water's super elevated in October, the trees start to suck it down and cool down the atmosphere. In Giralda Plaza, Miracle Mile was partial living street. The travel lanes were not structural soil, but Giralda Plaza was from facade to facade, a complete living street. And it's about $48 a square foot to build that. That includes all the art infrastructure. So every time you go to Giralda Plaza, there's a seasonal art that's curated. And there's an incredible Mexican artist who did some beautiful yarn work that's open today. So go check out Giralda Plaza. And you can see that work here, but it's gorgeous. Now, Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico, and we designed, years before Maria, a 2-kilometer coastline with $55 million budget with the mayor of Mayagüez, which is the 3rd largest city on the west coast of Puerto Rico, and the governor of Puerto Rico at the time. And on the site, there were these stormwater pipes flowing into the bay, and the bay didn't have that Caribbean look that you expect, the clear water, because of this effluent. yet they didn't have a budget to treat this. But there were cost-efficient ways that EPA had developed through phytoremediation wetlands that we developed Puerto Rico's first pilot in order to convert those stormwater pipes into modern or city versions of these ancient exchange between fresh and salt water. And these aerial photos you see here on the left, your left, before construction, the bay was polluted. And the photo on the right, these are not renderings, they're photos, after the wetlands were constructed. Now the water is clear again and fish have returned. And this project is almost 20 years old now. My firm is 20 years old and we were founded by this project. But we embedded, it's a hybrid approach. We have a sheet pile wall, gray infrastructure, and green infrastructure together. And we have oysters, we have mangroves, and those pipes that were on the beach, you can see it on the right side. It's snipped back. We edited it back and sized the wetlands to be able to polish this. So this is a dense city, a colonial city, a historic city, several hundred years old, older than the country. And the question is, how do we make space in our cities? Well, we have to work under the city, and sometimes we have to buy real estate and create space for it through pocket parks. And I'll close with this last project that we work with Rachel Silverstein from Waterkeeper on. They did a massive citizen outreach on ideas, and this was one of the top ideas, which was to take a watershed approach to one of the low-lying zones, which is Larchmont Park, and work across agencies, including South Florida Water Management District. And I don't know if Catalina is here today. She's one of our contributors. But this was taking a county park on the pour point of a watershed where there was ancient Everglades sloughs flowing and pouring into this point. And turning that park with a budget of $14 million into a massive sponge. And it requires that same excavation and then rebuilding the park on top of that. But it shows the cross section. And in this part of this canal, it's freshwater, not salt. So it's not oysters, it's mussels, freshwater mussels. And building those into a boardwalk that, with gabion that can house those mussels to polish that water. So there's no excuse, whether it's fresh or salt, there's ways to unleash nature to do what nature does, but you have to make room for it and find ways to supercharge it. And then, of course, all the cultural needs that the community had determined are required for this park, ball fields and playgrounds and such. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Take a picture because this is really interesting. I wish I had 2 more minutes, but this in 1 minute? I can have 1 minute? Okay. You know, I was going to wrap up with sort of asking why these conversations have been so difficult to have in South Florida. So thank you for opening this up and making these conversations okay to have amongst the development community. So thank you for that. And then I was actually wanted to ask you what doing better looks like, but I think we've all seen that. So thank you for that. Before I get to the quick, Walter, I want you to talk about innovative funding for a moment, because this is really interesting. I want to thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time and for spending part of your afternoon with us today. It's been just really wonderful, and I'm thrilled to be having these conversations, so thank you. So 1 minute. Talk to us, please, about this different innovative funding options for resilient projects.
Yeah, I'll let you guys snapshot that and research yourself. I'm sure everyone's facile with AI now because it's everywhere. Let it break it down for you. But I wanted to give some lived experiences. You know, in cities around the U.S., I've built on the 3 coasts of the United States, the Gulf, the West Coast, and East Coast. In each city I work in, there's a handful of developers who, yes, they're responsible to make money for their investors, but that's just like a monopoly board game. Once they do that, they're interested in something else. And those are these benevolent developers. And I'm building a net zero neighborhood in New York City right now with Ron Mullis, L&M Development, because he's also interested in this. But something that happens, this happens at almost a lot of the projects, where I lay out the ROI on these systems, the return on investment. And we always have the low-hanging fruit, then we have middle fruit, and then we have the high-hanging fruit. Usually the public projects are dealing with the high-hanging fruit to have the most impact. That's a big infrastructure or resiliency projects. And then developers, when they're interested, will try to get that low-hanging fruit by letting housing and the investment pay for it. But in the middle of the tree is a sweet spot where the public and private dollar come together. And I think there's a missing opportunity in Miami for a Bay Trust Fund. That is a trust fund. Darling. Good to see. I love it. Thanks for the shout out. We're working together with Black and Beach on a project in Puerto Rico. But we're talking billions. So every wealthy family moving to Miami, start contributing. Public dollar, start contributing. It's not necessarily a tax. And it can't be diluted, because what happens is the CRAs take these TIF monies and start moving it around. This has to be bioregionally locked. It has to be for the Bay, not for the rest of the city. And we can only spend the interest rate on it. And then it has to be, the best model to follow is the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. They're quasi-NGO, so they're quasi-governmental. What that means is they're an NGO, but there's board members that are elected, board members that are community members, board members that are academics, and policy. And they all intersect. And that way there's some ethical overlay. So there's no single mayor that can come in and redirect the money and dilute it. Why? Because we need a massive trust fund to fill the gaps so that when there's a large parcel or even a small house, and we can fund match, and I'm talking serious fund match, like 3-to-1 type match, 3 from the trust and 1 from the investor. Because what I've found is David and Ken, we do the things that housing will pay for. And sometimes they go a little more into the community benefit zone. But to get up in the tree where you get the most impact, the best tasting fruit, we need a gap fill, a gap analysis, so that public dollar gets more efficiency by going where the private money is, right? So that trust fund can do a lot of great things, but it has to be a massive scale, and it has to be quasi-governmental, has to be an NGO. So I'm just leaving that behind as a unique thing that I've seen in every city that I think Miami can learn from. And the last lived experience I'll share with you is several years ago, before I started my firm, I was the director of sustainability for Cooper Robertson and Partners. And we did the master plan for Museum Park Miami, where we set up the museum, the science, the art, and we recommended in that plan to do a TIF, that is a tax increment finance district, on all the parcels that front on that park. We copied that from Bryant Park in Manhattan. Bryant Park was renovated, and all the properties that benefit adjacent contribute to the operation, maintenance, and programming of Bryant Park. That's why Bryant Park's so incredible. You go there in the winter, there's ice skating, you go in the summer, there's salsa bands, it's intense. Museum Park missed that opportunity. Now we don't have the O&M dollars to make that park flourish, right? So what I'm leaving behind is the problem with these TIFs is the CRAs can dilute the money and move it across the city and do other things. So we have to make it future-proofed politically.
Thank you so much, David, Walter, Juan, and Ken. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, before we go into our breakout rooms, which start at 2:30, I just want to give you a little guidance here. So our manatee and seagrass rooms are directly behind me, so you'll have to walk out and go to those rooms. And then we have our Bayview room over on this way. But before we do that, we're going to have a few words from our sponsors.
There was a time when navigating the water meant relying on outdated infrastructure, weathered markers, low visibility, unsafe channels. But maritime safety must evolve. Introducing Lumency, a new generation of intelligent LED channel markers designed for safer navigation. Precision engineered, highly visible, built for the modern ocean. By day, clear architectural forms guide the way. By night, powerful integrated LED illumination transforms the channel into a safe, visible navigation path. Integrated lighting, environmental monitoring, advanced surveillance systems, autonomous renewable energy, elegant, efficient, built for real marine environments. From yachts to commercial vessels to coastal navigation corridors, Lumency creates greater visibility, greater awareness, and greater confidence on the water. This This is not just a marker. This is the future of intelligent maritime infrastructure. Lumen Sea, lighting your way to safety.